Ota Benga was born around 1883 in Central Africa, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was a member of the Mbuti people, indigenous hunter-gatherers of the Ituri forest, often derogatorily referred to as pygmies by Westerners due to their short stature. Benga lived peacefully with his tribe, hunting forest elephants and antelope with nets and arrows, gathering honey and foraging for edible plants. The men wore simple loincloths, the women leaves, and they lived in small temporary forest shelters. Their lives changed when Belgian King Leopold claimed Congo as his personal property in 1885. Leopold exploited Congo for its ivory and rubber, forcing indigenous people into brutal, slavery-like labor through violent intimidation by his force publique. Villages that didn't produce enough rubber had their hands chopped off or were massacred. The terrorizing of Congo continued for decades. Around 1900, Benga's village was attacked by the force publique. His wife and 2 children were among the slaughtered. Benga escaped only because he was on a hunting trip, later captured by African slave traders, likely from the enemy Bashilele tribe. Benga was eventually sold to European traders and ended up in the hands of American missionary and self-styled explorer Samuel Phillips Verner. Verner made money procuring Africans for human zoos, which displayed indigenous people in mocked-up native villages. Apologists claimed it educated Westerners about primitive cultures, but it promoted racist concepts of white superiority, social Darwinism, and the imperialist idea of the white man's burden. Verner acquired Africans for exhibitions by taking advantage of Congo's exploitation under King Leopold. For the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, Verner brought several Batwa people from Congo, including Ota Benga. They were displayed in a human zoo exhibit ironically called the Old Plantation. After the fair, Verner returned his other Africans but kept Benga, later taking him to the Bronx Zoo in 1906. Zoo director William Hornaday initially had Benga doing menial work around the grounds. But when Hornaday noticed crowds became more fascinated with Benga than the animals, he decided to put Benga on display. The exhibit promoted racist views of African inferiority. In a cage with an orangutan named Dohong, the 5-foot-tall Benga was labeled the missing link. At first, the display was immensely popular, drawing record crowds. But African-American clergymen and other critics began protesting the degradation of exhibiting a man with apes. Hornaday and prominent zoo supporters like Madison Grant defended it as educational science, believing Benga belonged to a lesser human species. The New York Times also dismissed criticisms and said it was absurd to imagine Benga's suffering since he was very low in the human scale. But protests increased until Hornaday eventually removed Benga from the cage in late September. Though the exhibition continued, the crowds grew unruly, chasing and taunting Benga, who became violent in self-defense. Unable to control Benga and disturbed by mob scenes, Hornaday looked to get rid of his problematic spectacle. But he refused to release Benga to an African-American orphanage without promise of return. After 3 weeks on display and 20 days total at the zoo, Benga was finally removed on September 28th and taken to the Howard Colored Orphan Asylum in Brooklyn. In January 1910, he was transferred to the Lynchburg Theological Seminary in Virginia, a respected African-American school. There, Benga lived across from the seminary with Mary Hayes Allen, widow of the school's former president, and her 7 children. Free to roam Lynchburg, Benga led local boys on forest hunting trips, taught them wildlife lore and traditional Mbuti skills like building forest shelters and fires. At night, he sang tribal hunting songs and danced ceremonially around campfires. The boys watched enthralled, but detected in Benga a deepening melancholy. He slowly slipped into depression as hopes faded of returning to his Congo homeland and village, which had likely been destroyed. When World War I halted passenger ship traffic in 1914, Congo was cut off completely. Benga's depression worsened over time as he lost interest in activities with the local boys. His nights were troubled with memories and longings. Days spent idling alone under trees, Benga was frequently heard singing a hymn learned at seminary, "I believe I'll go home, Lordy, won't you help me?" On March 20th, 1916, Benga committed suicide. That morning, the boys spied him making a large fire in a field. Benga circled the brilliant flames, chanting and moaning sorrowfully. That night, he stole a gun hidden in a shed and shot himself. Around 33 years old, Benga was buried in an unmarked grave in the colored section of Old City Cemetery. His remains were later lost when blacks-only graves were moved. Benga's dramatic story, from African forest hunter to caged human zoo exhibit to suicide death in America, has inspired artists, activists, and academics. His life illustrates the evils of racism, colonialism, social Darwinism, and human zoos, which continued displaying exotic peoples as savage creatures into the 1950s. Honoring Ota Benga helps ensure such cruel exploitation and racial hatred is not repeated. His unimaginable suffering reveals the dark underbelly of American history and the ease at which a person can be stripped of humanity when prejudices prevail. The change in sympathetic boys who loved him to apathetic crowds happy to see him caged demonstrates how quickly people can be conditioned to condone grave injustice. Ota Benga's short, tragic life stands as a symbol of all those who have been oppressed, brutalized, and treated as subhuman because of their race. By sharing silent stories like his, a light is shined on past wrongs and hope kindled that future generations may live in a world where all people are recognized equally as human, treated with dignity, and judged only by their character. The ongoing struggle against racism and discrimination is a difficult journey, but remembering those like Ota Benga points the way towards a more just society based on mutual respect and compassion. Thank you for watching. I would want to take a moment to express our appreciation for the support you have provided. The support and engagement of our viewers serves as a source of motivation for us to produce more compelling melanin-rich content. We request that you consider subscribing to our channel and activate the notification bell to keep informed about all our uploads. Peace.